Good evening, everybody. Again, we meet again to study the presentation on the status of the path to enlightenment. And currently we're covering the section that explains the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher, which is for us very important. Particularly when putting it into practice, there is a danger of developing misconceptions with respect to the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher. Looking at the way that this topic has been covered before, we can go back to the time in which our Guru Vajradhara, Rinpoche, has taught it. And when he taught it way back, when he taught the Lamrim, he did not touch upon the topic of the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher. In some sense, you can say that he skipped the section of the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher, and there is a reason for presenting it in this way. Now, if you might be thinking, what the reason was for Guru Vajradhara missing out on the section on the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher? Well, there are certain points that are taught in this section, such as, for example, the way to develop a sense of respect to the teacher, the way that we rely upon a spiritual teacher in making offerings and the like. And there's a danger of developing some misconceptions and misunderstanding with respect to those things. So way back when Guru Vajradhara was teaching the status of the path to enlightenment, he did not teach the section of the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher. Now later on, a group of people traveled to India, 20-odd people traveled to India, and they asked Rinpoche for the reason of not teaching the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher. At that point, Rinpoche appointed someone else to give the teachings on the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher. After all, when we think of the context in which those teachings were given, there was a group of people that traveled from outside of India, from the West or from Singapore or what have you, to travel to India, and they asked particularly for these teachings, and those teachings are important. As we said before, they do cover an essential point, and it is essential that we develop a correct understanding of the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher. So we're not going to have a long preliminary teachings. We're going to get straight to the teachings on the Lamrim, and as usual, we first of all begin with correcting our motivation. In doing so, we're going to recite together Gaden Shartse, the hundreds of deities of the land of joy. We're going to also correct our motivation in terms of going for refuge in bodhicitta. So please take your time to think of refuge in bodhicitta, and let's do this recitation together. Now, in covering the section of the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher, we are looking at the points that explain, first of all, the benefits, the profit of relying upon a spiritual teacher. We've covered actually this section already. You might recall that there are 8 points that are made explaining the profits, the benefits of relying upon a spiritual teacher. Likewise, there's a section that explains the opposite of relying upon a spiritual teacher, in a sense that it is either that you do not rely upon a spiritual teacher, or the way of relying upon a spiritual teacher is incorrect, it has lapsed. So you get drawbacks, you get faults from not relying upon a spiritual teacher. So having looked at these 2 sections, and we're still covering the second section that explains the drawbacks of not relying upon a spiritual teacher, or your way of relying upon a spiritual teacher has been incorrect. So we can then take the time to appreciate those 2 presentations, the profits, the benefit on one hand, and then the drawback, the faults on the other hand. And once we can have a sense of appreciation of those 2 ends, we can then think of what kind of practice would be profitable for us. What are we going to do with that? After all, when we take something out, we want it to be beneficial for us. We want it to be profitable. So then looking at those 2 points in the presentation, the benefits of relying upon a spiritual teacher and the drawbacks of not relying upon a spiritual teacher, the way of relying upon a spiritual teacher has lapsed, then we come down on the conclusion that we ought to rely upon a spiritual teacher. So then we take it up, we accept it. And once we rely upon a spiritual teacher, we need to make sure that our way of relying upon a spiritual teacher is done correctly. For if it is done incorrectly, then we'll have some faults, we'll have some drawbacks. So we then want to become informed of the correct way of relying upon a spiritual teacher. So then we will now start with the section of the disadvantages of not relying on a spiritual guide or letting your devotion lapse, which means that letting our way of relying upon a spiritual teacher degenerate, turn bad. So though there are many drawbacks that can be explained in not properly relying upon a spiritual teacher, still the text here emphasizes 8 drawbacks for not properly relying upon a spiritual teacher. Let's look at this section. It says, the disadvantages of not relying on a guru are the opposite of the above 8 advantages. We've covered that section. That the next paragraph says, there are 8 disadvantages to letting your devotion lapse. Now here the word devotion is a translation of the Tibetan term that refers to the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher. So we can also understand this section as explaining what happens when our way of relying upon a spiritual teacher lapses, when it goes wrong. Once you begin to rely upon a guru, and it's not any guru, you need to have first of all made sure that the Lama, the guru that you rely upon, has all the defining characteristics of a fully qualified spiritual teacher. So once you have assessed him, and once you have found that this is a Lama, a spiritual friend, a guru that is suited to you, and you have decided to rely upon that person as a spiritual teacher, it is a grave misdeed to let your devotion lapse, which means that your way of relying upon him goes wrong. Thus, you must receive Dhamma teachings only after thorough investigation into whether that person is worthy or not. Now, the person being worthy or not of relying upon them as a spiritual teacher needs to be addressed in a serious manner, in a sense that, for example, in terms of your diet, there are types of food that agree with you and types of food that disagree with you. It's not that you can eat whatever is out there in front of you. You need also to take into consideration the type of food that agrees with your body, that is beneficial to you, and to abstain, to refrain from things that are not good for you. Similarly, in taking up the reliance upon a spiritual teacher, you need to find the one that suits your particular disposition, the one that is beneficial to your mental disposition. So rather than just relying upon anyone, you also need to make sure that, first off, that the person has the qualification, the defining characteristics of a spiritual teacher, but also that they're suited to your temperament so that they can benefit you. And once you find out who is suited for you and you decide to rely upon that person as a spiritual teacher, then you need to make sure that you do it correctly. For the first disadvantage says that if you inadvertently disparage your guru, you incite all the victorious ones, all the Buddhas. So if you disparage the Lama, in that if you criticize them, if you belittle them, if you use a language that is offensive and the like, if all of those different situations occur, you insult all the Buddhas. So our text says the Guru is the physical embodiment of all the Buddhas and has come in order to subdue you. So we regard our teacher to be an embodiment of all the Buddhas. So if you think of all the Buddha, all of them are condensed into our Lama. Our Lama is the embodiment of all of them. So in that sense, our text says that is a delegate. And Geshe said, I suppose that, when you think of having to attend a big meeting, if all of us would go into that big meeting, it would create a big commotion. It might be that not all of us would be able to participate in that big meeting. So rather than all of us going to that meeting, we choose one delegate, one representative, and that is the person that we send to that meeting. And similarly, you can say that the Guru, the Lama, is the delegate of the Buddhas that gives us Dhamma teaching. So in that sense, he is a representative, a delegate. He embodies those qualifications, those qualities of all the Buddhas, and is appointed to that position in order to subdue, to discipline our mind stream. So the text says, so if you inadvertently disparaging, if you criticize that Lama, if you use offensive language, if you say bad things about that Lama and so forth, you criticize all the Buddhas. So think about it. If you think of disparaging one Buddha, it is tantamount to disparaging all the Buddhas. In that, if you disparage one Buddha, if you say bad things about that Buddha, then you also will not turn out good. You actually will turn out badly. So here, criticizing, disparaging our Guru is the embodiment of all the Buddha, is tantamount to criticizing all Buddhas. So you must be careful not to disparage a single Buddha. So imagine how much more careful you must be in order not to insult all the Buddhas. So if insulting, disparaging one Buddha is tantamount to disparaging, criticizing all Buddhas, how grave it would be for us to create that negative actions. Sorry. So here, when we look at the section that explains what happens when we disparage, when we criticize, belittle the spiritual teacher, we say things like, for example, that Guru is not educated, that person has no qualities and so forth. Those actions are considered to be criticizing, disparaging, belittling the Guru. The section explains who the Guru is that is referred to by this section. So it's not any kind of Guru or Lama that you might meet. It refers to, as the text says, by Guru we mean someone who wants to teach, and a disciple is someone who wants to listen, even to as little as one verse, which means that there needs to be a combination of two factors in that equation. One of them is the one that wants to teach, the Lama, but also we, the disciple, who want to listen to the teachings. So disparaging the Guru within this combination of two is considered to be very, very grave. So rather than thinking about it as any Guru, random one that we might occasion to meet, here it's a very specific one. It's the one that is with the combination of someone that wants to teach us, and also we want to listen to those teachings. So disparaging that person is considered to be even grave, even insofar as that person has given us just brief teachings, even to as little as one verse. The next paragraph says, we carry out strict Guru devotion to our more famous gurus. So if there's someone that has a great reputation, someone that is very famous, we become really respectful. But treat others, such as one who taught us the alphabet, offhandedly. So when we think about it, when we think of how we develop that sense of respect, we remember the kindness of that person, we see them as pure, that is extended not only to those famous or great lamas, it also needs to be extended to those that teach us the alphabet. So if we do not develop the proper way of relying upon that spiritual teacher, even the one that just teaches us the alphabet, a text says that this is not right. And in order to illustrate that, Pabongka Rinpoche is giving an example from the life story of Je Drupkan Gelek Gyatso, who developed no realization while he still did not see as pure the disrobed monk who taught him the alphabet. So this point illustrates the importance of developing pure appearances, or to see as pure the one that you rely upon, even if that person is teaching you the alphabet. And as it says here, even if it's a disrobed monk who has taught you the alphabet. And Je Drupkan Gelek Gyatso did not develop realization so long as he still had that sense of contempt or belittling the person that has taught him the alphabet. And once he was able to remember the kindness of that person, to see the person as pure, to develop that sense of respect to that person, was able to develop realization. In order to illustrate that point, Pabongka Rinpoche draws from the essence of Nectar Lamrim, which says, all Buddhas perform their good works through spiritual guides, which means that the Buddhas are sending forth enlightened activities. These are the qualities of the Buddhas, and those enlightened activities are enacted through spiritual guides, through lamas that will rely upon you, and they appear to you, as the text says, as your own Guru. So our own Guru enacts those enlightened activities of the Buddhas. So disrespect to him is disrespect to all the victors, to all the Buddhas, so they say. If we disrespect the Guru, if we disparage the Guru, if we belittle the Guru, if we have a sense of contempt to the Guru, all of this is tantamount to disrespecting all the Buddhas. The ripening effect of such an action is therefore very heavy, very grave. Now, if you wonder what kind of heavy effect, ripening effect, will be produced from disparaging a Guru, which is tantamount to disparaging all the Buddhas. In order to explain the heavy, the grave ripening effect, Pabongka Rinpoche draws from the commentary to the Kalayamari Tantra, right? So there is a certain Tantra, there is a commentary to that Tantra that explains what occurs when we disparage a spiritual teacher. And it says, one who, upon hearing even one verse of teachings, does not hold that person as a Lama. So again, we need to understand that Lama to be the Lama within the combination of two. The Lama is the one who wants to teach, and we as the students are those who want to listen to those teachings. So if you disparage the Lama from within the combination of these two, the person will be born 100 times as a dog. And then the last line says, and then in the worst of the hells. Now, there's another reading of the last line that Geshe-la explained. So rather than taking it to be being born in the worst of the hells, Geshe-la explained that to be being born in a lower caste. So of course we need to understand it in a certain social situation, particularly when we think of the Buddha Dharma coming from India and how there was and still is a great consideration of the caste system within Indian society. To be born in a lower caste, such as, for example, to be born as a butcher, belonging to the caste of butchers or those who sell meat, is considered to be a low caste. Now, it's not that everyone would regard a butcher as a low caste. It is pervasive in some parts of Indian society, whereas in other parts it is not that prevalent. And also, for us, it's not necessarily the case that we will regard a butcher or someone that is selling meat on the market to be someone that belongs to a lower caste. But Geshe-la reckons that we can still understand the sentiment that is expressed here in this verse. So someone that disparages the Lama, and even if it's as far as teaching even one verse to you, and that Lama is within that combination of two, you want to listen to their teachings and then want to teach you. If you disparage that person, not only you will be born 100 times as a dog, also in the future you will be born into a lower caste, either as a butcher, or we can think about it as, in general, a lower caste. So then, in continuing with that, Ashwagosha's 50 verses of Guru Devotion, which is a text that explains the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher, echoes the same sentiment in saying that if you disparage your Guru, and again Geshe-la emphasizes that it refers to the Guru from within the combination of two, the one that wants to teach you, and you're the one who wants to listen to those teachings. So if you disparage that person, if you look down on that person, if you become dismissive of that person, after feeling he is your protector, and after becoming his disciple, then you disparage all the Buddhas. Suffering will then always be a lot. In that sense, you will be experiencing perpetual suffering. You will have no happiness, no pleasure, but you will find yourself in a perpetual state of suffering. Asula. So far, we've covered the first drawback of not relying properly on a spiritual teacher, and that occurs when you disrespect the spiritual teacher, you disparage that spiritual teacher. So Geshe-la has drawn out the essential points, the main points in the explanation of the first drawback. So first of all, we said that it is a heavy offense to disparage the spiritual teacher. That's the first point. And the second point that Geshe-la pulled out for us is explaining the type of guru that we refer to in this section. So there are two aspects that we need to consider. The Guru here is the one that wants to teach you the Dhamma, and you are the one that would like to listen to that explanation. So within the combination of the two, this is the Guru that the disparage of which causes that grave fault, grave drawback. which means that in having to have that combination of two, there are certain things that we need to consider. In that both sides need to be accepted by each other, in that the student needs to accept to take up that person as a spiritual teacher, which means that they need to have assessed the qualities of that person. They need to have seen that relying upon that person as a spiritual teacher is beneficial for them, and once they have assessed that, then they come to accept that person as their spiritual teacher. But also in a similar way, you can say that the spiritual teacher, the Lama, needs to have investigated the student, and they need to have accepted that person as their student. And in that way, there is a master and student connection that is being established here. So here we regard this great fault in this explanation with respect to a situation in which the connection of a master and a student, a teacher and a student, has been established. Both of them need to have accepted each other. So it doesn't refer to any odd Lama or any kind of Lama that we disparage. In a particular sense, it refers to the one in which a student and a teacher relationship has been created. So there's a grave fault that occurs when such a Lama is disparaged. And the reason for that, as we said, is because we regard that person, that Lama, as a delegate of the Buddhas. The person is a representative of the enlightened activities of the Buddha. Through that person, the enlightened activities of the Buddhas are being carried out. So then if we do not properly rely upon that spiritual teacher, that Lama, if we disparage them, if we belittle that person, we will then not be relying upon that person properly. So in order to avoid that grave misdeed, we need to reflect upon the qualities of that spiritual teacher. We need to remind ourselves of the kindness of that teacher and to see that person as pure. We ought not to pay attention, not to look out for faults in that person, but we need to think of the qualities of the kindness and to see them as pure in order to avoid the first the first drawback, which is disparaging the Guru. Now here we mentioned the connection between a teacher and a student, which is viewed in a particular way from the perspective of the Vinaya tradition. So in the Vinaya, the tradition that deals with disciplining, particularly it outlines the connection between a master and a student from the point of view of the vows that you have. So in that tradition, the Vinaya, it is said that the relationship between a teacher and a student should be like the relationship between a father and son. So you should adopt the mental attitude of the spiritual teacher being like your father. In that, from a worldly perspective, when your father is troubled, when your father experiences problems or difficulties, you need to help them out. If your father is sick, you need to nurse them. And the same thing also applies to the father. When you as the child, when you get sick, when you're troubled by a certain situation, the father, your father, will help you out, will take care of you. So in that sense, between a father and a child, a father and a son. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So, not only we need to then see the virtual spiritual friend, the spiritual teacher, as being Buddha in a very specific way from the point of view of Vinaya. A spiritual teacher is seen as a father, as our own father, Lasola. Stemming out from this discussion of the way that the relationship between a student and a teacher is viewed from the point of view of the Vinaya, we can also look at the relationship between ourselves and our parents, particularly in this day and age. It happens that sometimes that people of younger age neglect the parents, particularly when the parents get old, when they are of a greater need. It is seems that in our society, some people tend to be negligent about the parents, to leave them be without taking adequate care of their parents. So when we think about it, we can think about, first of all, ourselves, in that it will also happen to us. Old age will also happen to us. So in the same way that we would like to be taken care of by our parents, also when we think of our parents, we ought to think that we need to take care of our parents. As the Buddha said in one of the teachings that he gave, he said that if you want to see what will come to pass for you, you need to look at the actions that are performed. The type of action will be indicative of the results that will follow through. So it is not only true in general, also particularly for us as Dhamma practitioners, and we want to make sure that the way of practicing the Dhamma is done properly. We need to make sure that we repay the kindness of our parents, that we take good care of our parents. This is a point that Geshe-la wanted to mention that stems out of the discussion that we've just had. Let's look at the second drawback of not properly relying upon a spiritual teacher. And it says, when you develop angry thoughts towards your guru, when you become agitated, or when you develop wrathful, angry thoughts towards your guru, you destroy your root merits, or you destroy roots of virtue, and will be reborn in hell for the same number of eons as the number of moments of your anger. So Geshe-la explained it in the following way. When we think of the time span, or the time that you've spent in being angry, then one moment of anger produces birth in a hellish state of existence. And since when you're born in a hellish state of existence, it is likely that the state of existence will continue to exist in the sense that you will be born in the hells one time after the next. And one moment, 1 second of becoming angry will cause your detention in the hells for many types of rebirth. Now, this notion of one moment of anger is explained in the following way. So, it is said that there are 65 moments in a snapping of a finger, right? So you can say that it's a subtle moment, or a subtle second, let's say, in a snapping of a finger. The snapping of a finger consists of 65 such moments. So if you get angry with a spiritual teacher, for that brief moment, 1/65 of the snapping of a finger, it will cause your detention of the hell for a long time, detention in the hells for a long time, and will also destroy your roots of virtue. Let's see how this section explains that. It says, if you get angry at your guru, which means that the one that was very kind to you, the one that teaches you the Dhamma, you destroy an equivalent amount of root merits, roots of virtue, as the number of moments your anger lasted from start to finish. You must then stay in the hells for the same number of eons. So your detention in the hells will last for a very long time. So think about it, how one moment of anger, that brief moment of anger, creates that detention in the hell that lasts for eons, for the same number of eons as the moments of anger from start to finish. Then in order to illustrate that, Pabongka Rinpoche draws from the Sutra Tantra and saying, count the moments you were angry at the Guru. You destroy root virtues built up over eons. So you annihilate, you completely destroy those roots of virtue through getting angry at the Guru. So our goal is to progress from one higher ground to the next. And that depends upon the root of virtues that we have amassed up until that point. But should we get angry with the spiritual teacher, it is said that we will destroy roots of virtues built up over eons. And if all those roots of virtues are completely annihilated, are completely destroyed, we'll have no way to progress forward. We'll actually be progressing to hellish states of existence, to the hells, and thereby we will be experiencing the sufferings of the hells. As it says, you will experience intense suffering in hells. That will be your experience, your sensations, your feeling, and so on, for that very number of eons. So continuing with this explanation, it says, suppose you're angry for the duration of one snap of the fingers. As we said, there are 65 moments in one snapping of the finger. Suppose that you get angry for a duration of one of those moments. You destroy roots root virtues collected over 65 great eons, and you might stay in the hell without respite, the unrelenting hell, for that length of time. So if you're disrespectful to or disparage your guru, or get angry with or displease him, you must expiate these negativities in his presence while he's still alive. Now, this section indicates that you need to make sure that if you have created that action of disparaging the guru and so forth, or not relying upon that person properly, that you lay down that negative action, you confess it in front of them while they're still alive. If you haven't done it while they're still around, if you haven't done it in the presence, it seems that the purification of negativities will not be a complete or fully qualified one. It would be somewhat lesser than the one that you could do if you were to purify that at the presence of the Lama. So if that Lama is not present, you should expiate them before some of his relics. So the way that this section is worded suggests that it's best to lay down such negativities if you have created them. The best possible scenario would be to do that at the presence of the Lama. But even if they are no longer around, even if they are no longer alive, it's still better to do it than just setting it aside and not doing it at all. It's still best to do it. So suppose that you have the robes of the Lama. So the robes of the Lama would be in front of you. You then visualize them to be a representation of the Lama. You visualize that he is there. And then you make some supplications. You lay down those negativities sincerely. And in this way, you avoid some of the grave drawbacks that we mentioned in this section that come through developing angry thoughts towards the Guru. Chandakirti explained in his writings the result that you get from becoming angry. He spoke of the roots of virtues that have been accumulated over a certain number of eons and how they are destroyed through one moment of anger. In his supplement to the Middle Way, Chandakirti explains a certain situation where a bodhisattva gets angry with another bodhisattva, and the commentary to the text discusses a few situations. So when a certain bodhisattva gets angry with another bodhisattva, the degree of roots of virtue that is being destroyed is explained according to whether a higher bodhisattva is getting angry with a lower bodhisattva, or a bodhisattva with greater strength, with a lesser strength, or lesser strength with a greater strength. So such distinctions are made with respect to the degree of roots of virtue that are being destroyed and the duration of the detention in hell once such a moment of anger has been generated. So such discussion is found in Chandakirti's supplement to the Middle Way. Now, having said that, here we are discussing the situation in which we become angry with our spiritual teacher. So then, thinking of what Chandakirti explained in his supplement to the Middle Way, which then is understood to be the case when one bodhisattva is getting angry with another bodhisattva, here we're looking at a spiritual teacher. And then when we consider, for example, a Buddha is greater, you could say, is higher than all the bodhisattvas. And here, a spiritual teacher is regarded to be the embodiment of all the Buddhas. So needless to say that when one bodhisattva is getting angry with another bodhisattva, the detention in hell is so long, and such a great accumulation of roots of virtue is being destroyed, it would be much greater, much more severe. Here, when we get angry with a spiritual teacher that is the embodiment of all the Buddhas. So taking that into consideration and looking at our course of action, should we generate a moment of anger towards our spiritual teacher, then we ought to make sure that we find those opportunities to lay down those negative actions before our spiritual teacher dies. After all, if that person dies, we can still lay down those negativities, we can still confess and purify them, but Geshe-la reckons that the power of our purification, the laying down of our negativities, would be somewhat lesser than if we were to do that when our Lama is still alive. So if a Lama has died already, and we haven't had the opportunity to lay down such negativities while they were still alive, then, as we said, we can do that as a presence of the robe. So we then take the mental attitude, we visualize that the robes are representation of the actual Lama, so they're there with us. And when we lay down our negativities in the presence of the robes and taking into cognizance that this is the Lama, you could say that it is better than not doing that at all. And yet, Geshe-la reckons that it is somewhat lesser effect than doing it when they're still alive at their presence. Of course, looking at that from the perspective of the mental attitude that we develop towards the Lama and coming to see them as being a Buddha in actuality, and then also taking into cognizance that there is not a place and time in which the Buddha is not present, we can then think that we are confessing our negativities at the presence of the Lama, and yet it's still difficult to generate a sincere or a very forceful appreciation of the presence of the Lama. So Geshe-la reckons that we might then be thinking that it might be quite difficult actually to generate anger towards a spiritual teacher, and yet we should make sure that first off we avoid that. And if we've already had a moment of anger towards our spiritual teacher, we should make sure that we lay down that negative action before our teacher dies. Let's look at the third drawback of not properly relying upon a spiritual teacher, letting our reliance upon a spiritual teacher lapse. Now, here again, if we disparage the spiritual teacher, if we get angry with the spiritual teacher and so forth, our way of relying on a spiritual teacher has become corrupt, and therefore it says you will not achieve the supreme state, which is the state of the supreme state, which is the state of Buddha, despite your reliance on Tantra. So suppose that you have entered the mantra system, the system of the secret mantra. If you wrongly rely upon a spiritual teacher, let alone not developing realizations when you rely upon the tantras, you will not also attain the supreme state, which is the state of Buddha. So, in order to illustrate that, Pabongka Rinpoche draws from the Guya Samaja Root Tantra, which states that a sentient being might have committed great sins, great negativities, such as the heinous crimes. Now, those 5 serious or heinous actions are killing one's own father, killing one's own mother, killing an arhat, drawing blood from a Tathagata, from a Buddha, and creating a split in the Sangha community. These are the 5 heinous actions which, if we then look at the way that they are expressed in the Tibetan language, they are called the 5 actions without an intervening period. Which means that suppose that in this life you have created one of those 5 serious or grave actions, without an intervening period, in an intervening rebirth, you will immediately proceed to the hells in your next lifetime after death. So it is, you could say that it is like throwing a stone into a lake or into an ocean, where the stone sinks, descends down without stopping halfway through, without being suspended somewhere before it reaches the bottom of the ocean. So similarly, when you perform one of those grave 5 actions without an intervening period, you will immediately proceed to a hellish rebirth in your next lifetime. So let's look at that text, that quotation. It says, a sentient being may have committed great sins, great negativities, such as those 5 actions without an intervening period. The person can still succeed in the supreme vehicle, the great ocean of the Vajrayana. But someone who despises his master from his very heart may practice but will not succeed. So someone that has committed one of those 5 grave actions, those 5 actions without an intervening period, can still lay down that negativity. They can generate a great sense of regret for having committed that action. They can lay down that negativity and thereby cause it to be purified, so that realizations of the supreme vehicle, not only the supreme vehicle, here it refers to the great ocean of the Vajrayana, they can still purify that action and succeed in the ocean of mantra. However, someone that despises the master, if they disregard, if they despise, if they have a sense of contempt to the master from the very heart, they may practice, but their practice will not succeed. In order to explain that, it says, no matter how great sinner you may be, having committed the 5 heinous crimes and so forth, you will soon achieve the supreme goal by relying, for example, on the path of the Guhya Samaja Tantra, which means that, first of all, if you've created great negative actions, even as far as creating one of those 5 actions without an intervening period, you can still lay them down through a process of confession and purification, which necessitates the development of great regret for the negative actions that you have done. You can still purify those actions and achieve the supreme goal by relying, for example, on the path of the Guhya Samaja Tantra. So in this tradition, there are 3 main deities of High Suga Tantra. There are Guhya Samaja, that's the first one. Then we have Vajradhara Yamantaka, the second one, or Chakasambhara. So you can still attain the supreme state, the supreme goal, by relying, for example, on the path of Guhya Samaja Tantra, or by the path of those other tantras that we've mentioned, Vajradhara or Chakasambhara. However, if you despise your master from your heart, they say that you will not achieve the supreme goal no matter how much you practice. So therefore, we ought to be careful. We ought to be careful that we do not fall down to that way of behaving, despising a guru, belittling a guru, having a sense of contempt, and so forth. All those ways of wrongly relying upon a spiritual teacher would ensure that no matter how much we practice, we will not achieve the supreme goal, and therefore we ought to be careful. Let's look at the next drawback, the 4th one in line. It says, though you seek the benefits of Tantra, so you might be practicing Tantra, you seek the benefits of the Tantras, your practice will achieve only the hells and the light, which means that your practice will not lead you to your desired goal. You will only achieve birth in the hells and the light, not only in the hells, also in other miserable states of existence, such as the hungry ghosts, the pretas, and so forth. The text says, no matter how hard a person with lapsed tantric commitments to his master may practice, the person would achieve only the hells. So if that person has lapsed commitments to their spiritual teacher, to this virtuous friend, to the master, no matter how much effort they will put in the practice, the person will achieve only the hells. To support that, the ornament of the Vajradhara Tantra tells us, whoever despises, Geshe said, not only despising, criticizing, disparaging, belittling a guru, claiming, for example, that that person has no qualities or no education whatsoever. So whoever despises his perfect master in this way, though he be the best practitioner of every tantra, though he give up all society and sleep. Here society means that they might give all the hustle and bustle of society. They might give up on all the frivolous entertainment that one can find in our society. They might even give up sleep and practice well for 1,000 eons. The person will achieve nothing out of the practice. They will only achieve the hells and so on. After all, here this drawback is attributed to having broken the samaya that we have with a lama. And when you let that samaya degenerate, when you break the samaya with a spiritual teacher, you will not achieve the goal of your practice. You will only achieve the hells and so forth. We've covered a few drawbacks of not properly relying upon a spiritual teacher, and this emphasizes the great importance of properly relying upon a spiritual teacher, a topic that is emphasized not only in the sutras but also in the tantras. So both of those sets of teachings, the sutras and the tantras, refer to the importance of properly relying upon a spiritual teacher. Now, there are those who claim that Tibetan Buddhism is Lamaism, right? So you might have had this term before, Lamaism. There are those who say that Tibetan Buddhism is not a genuine form of Buddhism. They call it Lamaism. They take the topic that is so emphasized in the teaching, the way to rely upon a spiritual teacher, and draw the conclusion that therefore Tibetan Buddhism is Lamaism. Well, this is attributed to not really understanding the topic of the proper way of relying upon a spiritual teacher. It's not understanding well the benefits of relying upon a spiritual teacher, the drawbacks of not properly relying upon a spiritual teacher. In not understanding those points, they claim that Tibetan Buddhism is Lamaism. So it is not that relying upon a spiritual teacher is something that you find in Tibet. It's actually sourced in the teachings of the Buddha, because the Buddha said that not only in the Tantras but also in the Sutras that he emphasized the importance of relying upon a spiritual teacher. So if we look at not only the Buddha that we refer to, the Buddha, the Bhagavans, but we can say that there are many Buddhas, many those that have become Buddhas, and they are around us, and yet for us to become Buddhas, the only way that we can do it is through properly relying upon a spiritual teacher. Even though there are many Buddhas, the only way for us to proceed and to become Buddhas ourselves is through properly relying upon a spiritual teacher. And this is something that is not only emphasized in the Gelug tradition, but this is something that is common to all traditions within Tibetan Buddhism. The Sakya, the Nyingma, the Kagyu, the Gelug, all of them attribute that great importance to properly relying upon a spiritual teacher, and no tradition excludes that topic from the core teachings in that tradition. It is not only emphasized in the Tibetan tradition, also when you look at the writings of the Indian masters, you see that they also refer to a correct way of relying upon a spiritual teacher. So then looking at where we go from this point in time, if we do not wish to become a Buddha, if this is not what we want, we don't need to rely upon a spiritual teacher. But if we do want to become Buddhas, then relying upon a spiritual teacher is important, because however small might be the realization that we develop in our mind, it can only be developed if we properly rely upon a spiritual teacher. And therefore, that whole discussion that says that Tibetan Buddhism is Lamaism is not really getting at the point. It's not correct. It is not the right one, because our way of becoming a Buddha, our own Buddhahood, depends upon proper reliance upon a spiritual teacher. Also, the Buddha himself, before becoming a Buddha, when he was still a trainee along the path, he was able to develop the stages of the path, and thereby to become a Buddha only depends upon proper reliance upon a spiritual teacher. Looking at our situation at the present, we have access to the Buddha Dhamma, in that the Buddha Dhamma is becoming widespread in places outside of Tibetan society, because it was kept and preserved in the great monasteries, in the colleges, the kamsens, in different monasteries where you have geshes and spiritual teachers that have preserved those teachings, that kept the teachings, including the proper way to rely upon a spiritual teacher, a topic that is emphasized in the sutras and the tantras. And therefore it is not Lamaism, it is Buddhism, as sourced not only in the Tibetan tradition but also in the Indian tradition. So having looked at those points, Geshe-la also wants to leave enough time for some questions and answers. So we didn't have time to take questions. We had some difficulty with the audio system in the last couple of sessions. So we still have some time to take some questions. So if you have some burning questions, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. We have taken so many teachings from different lamas, and does that mean that you mentioned the connection, so does that mean that every one of them I should also have this strong guru devotion? That's my question number one. Question number two is the one that we have the biggest connection is very far away. There is not possible for us to serve our guru in the way that we want. And so how do we still have that strong guru devotion in terms of the, how do we grow that guru devotion. You can only grow it in the heart, the mind, that devotion, but not anything else more than that. That you understand where I'm coming from?
I didn't hear the beginning of the second question. You spoke about growing the sense of devotion that we have in our hearts, to be strong devotion, but I didn't get the first part of that question. Could you please repeat that?
The second question is, the guru is very far away. The one that we have the biggest connection is very far away. Say, for example, it's so far away, it's not near. So we are not able to display our, the things that we want to do for our gurus.
Okay. Looking at your questions, first of all, the first question was regarding many lamas that we might have received teaching from. Do we need to rely upon all of them as spiritual teachers in the way that was explained here? Well, you might get teachings from a certain lama, from a spiritual teacher, and you think from your side that this is a lama that I rely upon. So it's not, first of all, it's not necessarily the case that you will have that thought with respect to whoever you get teachings from. You get teaching from a particular individual, and then the thought comes, this is a person that I'm going to rely upon as a spiritual teacher. But also from the side of that person, they also need to then think that such and such a person is my student. Like, for example, they need to be thinking about it with respect to you. So you think about it with respect to the Lama. This is someone that I rely upon. This is my Lama. And they also need to think of you as their student, so that in that way you have an established relationship of a spiritual teacher and a student. And in that case, you need to make sure that you properly rely upon that person as a spiritual teacher. Now, once such a connection is established, you do not make a distinction between different spiritual teachers that you might have, in thinking that I have strong faith in it, but I have a weaker faith in the other. We don't make such a distinction between the life of the spiritual teachers that we follow. We have a similar
Kugumindo.
Now the Skype says it's time.
Time over.
So, Lindy, you haven't got your second question, right? Huh?
Next.
Oh, no. Are you going to type out the answer? No, right? So. Okay.
Next
class,
No problem, no problem. Again.
Okay.
Again question.
Chojichi. Okay.
Oh yeah, tu chela ni. Oh, Chanjo, Senjo, Rinpoche, Ma Je Panam.